Well, hello, everyone. My name is McKenzie Kane with the National Sports Media Association, joined by one of the 2024 Maryland Sports Writers of the Year, Jonas Shaffer. Mr. Shaffer, thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you, McKenzie.
Well, would you mind just starting off with a brief introduction? Can you share what your current role is in the sports writing world?
Sure. Ever since January 2023, I've been a Ravens reporter for the Baltimore Banner, which is a nonprofit news organization in Baltimore. Formerly was also a Ravens reporter at the Baltimore Sun. So yeah, that's pretty much my full-time job.
Well, this is your first time ever receiving this award, and it's actually with a news journal that you've only been with for, like you said, 1 year, January 2023. So can you just share a little bit about what this accomplishment means to you?
Yeah, it was awesome. I would love to be sole recipient of the honor, but I don't mind. I'm sharing it with one of my partners or colleagues on the beat, Jameson Hensley, who's also a Terp, also a Ravens reporter. But yeah, it's a great bit of recognition. Obviously we don't do this for the notoriety or the acclaim, but it's definitely nice to have some distinctions like this, just to remind you that every once in a while you can do something right.
Well, I'm curious, what sparked this passion for sports reporting? When did you know that this was the field you wanted to go into?
Growing up in the DC area, obviously, my parents were subscribers to the Post, so you have this incredible template for what good journalism is arriving on your doorstep every single day. And I went to a high school, Montgomery Blair, in Silver Spring, Maryland, that has or had probably still does have a very well-regarded student newspaper, Silver Chips. So sophomore year, there was an invitation to write for something called the JV Journal, which is basically, covering the high school JV teams. From there, you transition into the actual, staff membership on Silver Chips, where you're covering sports, you're writing features, writing game stories. And then, senior year, you're a reporter, senior year, you're an editor slash reporter, and then just transitioned from that into applying to journalism schools and got into Maryland. Was able to write for the Diamondback pretty early, the student newspaper there. And yeah, ever since then has just been on this trend where you're writing about sports or editing sports or thinking about sports. And fortunately, that's led me to where I am today.
Well, I mean, having grown up in Maryland, is it safe to assume you were born and raised Ravens fan?
No, because I was closer to Silver Spring as a suburb of DC, so was unfortunately indoctrinated as a Redskins slash Commanders fan.
Well, I was curious if there was any strategy for balancing informing your audiences with staying objective. But I guess as a Commanders fan, you might not have that same uh, fan pride to the Ravens. But I'm curious, has there been any instances where you've had to teeter with that line of objectivity and just reporting the news?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, like growing up in Maryland, I was a Maryland Terps fan, and obviously going to the school, you have to put those biases and prejudices aside. I mean, I think most people in the profession will tell you that the longer that you cover a team, the less romanticism you have for it. You are dealing with real people who are flawed, who will kind of dissuade you of your, unabiding love for the sport. I mean, I think the the kind of crisis, not crisis, but the issue that you see nowadays is that there are more and more fanboys and fangirls who are being treated as authorities on the subject when there is this, lack of professionalism, I guess. So there is this kind of conflation of reporters who are, supposed to be objective and reporters who are definitely not. And there is this lack of, you know, media savvy among the people who are consuming that news and not able to distinguish between those two because the line between objectivity and subjectivity just seems so thin in a lot of areas. But, I think even people who, are fans of a team, who were fans of a team growing up, you know, you run into enough a-holes in the industry or on the teams that love for that team has kind of disappeared. And in a lot of ways, it can be an asset, that background and that love for a team, because it probably colors the way that you think about the team, or it gives you a sense of historical perspective that maybe it would have been a little harder to earn as kind of an outsider coming in. But I think for the most part, you're able to see these guys for the people that they are, which some of them are good, some of them are bad. And hopefully that informs your experience, and hopefully that informs your reporting process in a way that, is ultimately pretty good and objective.
Well, I guess on that same note, what would you say sets your style of writing or the way you approach reporting apart from some of your counterparts?
Yeah, I think it's tough to stand out in this profession. I think one of the good things about the Banner is we have access to a lot of resources, a lot of statistical databases and stuff. That's something that I like to do to kind of set us apart. You have access to numbers and ways of thinking about numbers that maybe is different from your average run-of-the-mill NFL reporter. So you're able to look at what Lamar Jackson is doing on 3rd and long, or what the Ravens defense is doing on 2nd and short, and kind of contextualize that in a way that hopefully can set you apart. And obviously, we love a good feature story. We love deep dives into these athletes, whether it's kind of a by the book feature story on a guy and his tough upbringing, or something that's a little bit more off the beaten path, like talking about a Ravens lineman who's a big wine guy, and just kind of doing 800 words on that, and hopefully people read it. So there are a lot of ways to do sports journalism in 2024 that's cool and distinctive, and hopefully value adding to the news organization. Obviously, breaking news is the ultimate currency, and that's why Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport are getting paid the millions of dollars that they do. But there are lots of other ways to do stuff that's cool and informative, and hopefully worthy of an audience in 2024.
Definitely. Well, I guess what would you say is the most valuable lesson or skill that you've learned or developed over the course of your career, which you attribute to the success or this growth?
Probably just like curiosity. I think even though I grew up reading the Post, I think probably like the most informative and like formative experience I had was like reading the New York Times sports section, late in high school, early in college, because they would do stuff that was a little bit different. They would, try different feature stories, that they would, kind of go into these, massively popular events like the Super Bowl or the NCAA tournament, or I don't know, like a NASCAR race, and just try to do stuff that was obviously not only well written and well reported, but just looked at stuff from a different prism. And I think that's the way that I kind of try to approach my job, because you have so many people looking at sports through the exact same way, but you have to find a way to look at that stuff through a different kind of lens or a different kind of prism. I mean, like, I think one of the stories that I submitted, or that my editor submitted for me for this like sports editor, uh, award submission thing, was like during the Lamar Jackson contract standoff last year. There's a lot of uncertainty about it. There was, an opacity toward the whole subject, which kind of prevented you from writing authoritatively about it, because the Ravens weren't talking and Lamar Jackson certainly wasn't talking. So, what I did was reach out to a couple relationship experts to talk about like how much in real life money can be a stressor on relationships. There is that imbalance between men and women, or, not just men and women, but, partners in day-to-day life, where money is a real imposition on a lot of relationships, because, if you're making more than your partner, then that kind of, gives you fairly or unfairly a certain, you know, power in that relationship, and you have to kind of deal with that. And there was a lot of application to what normal workaday Americans have to deal with to the Lamar Jackson situation, because Lamar felt like he was owed a certain amount. The Ravens maybe didn't, and you had this kind of convergence of what happens when two people who have been in a very, very serious and happy relationship suddenly have to put a price tag on what that meant. So I just like to do stories like that that are a little different, a little wonky. Maybe people respond to them, maybe they don't, but hopefully you have that curiosity to actually think about things in a different way, and hopefully that leads to people actually checking you out.
Well, what does that process look like for finding these news stories, for keeping track of all these different leads and just preparing for the weeks in general?
I think a lot of it is just doing the homework. It's trying to listen to as many interviews, trying to read as much, trying to watch as much as possible. Not just on your specific team, but the league in general. You have to be aware of trends. You have to know history. You have to know what might be coming down the future, so that you're prepared to write about stuff in an interesting way. You're only as good as what you're kind of working with. A chef is only as good as his ingredients, so you have to have as many kind of things at your disposal as possible, and hopefully you know what to do with them. That there's, I'm sure, people who are better read than me, or more have a wider base of knowledge about the Ravens because maybe they are a fan, or because maybe that's all they think about. But if you can't think creatively or constructively with that information, then hopefully that's where I can kind of shine.
Now, you were exposed to the world of sports publication from a fairly young age. You wrote in college, you wrote in high school, but I also read your bio about the photo in Sports Illustrated when you were 7. I was wondering if you could just mention that or talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it's a funny story. I actually shared the photo in a couple weeks ago, month ago or so, in light of the whole uncertainty around Sports Illustrated and just their shaky future of that publication. But when I was like, I think it was 6 years old, it was the first. It would have been the 1996 or 1998 presidential election cycle. I forget exactly which one, but that was around when the phrase soccer mom was kind of coming into its infancy as like an actual demographic. And obviously I was playing soccer, youth soccer back then. And my mom was not typically the one going out to my games, because I think she was also looking after my younger brother. So it was typically my dad who was going out to these games. But in this particular instance, I'm out at a soccer game somewhere in suburban DC, and there happens to be a Washington Post photographer who's at the game, and my mom is also there, and sees me with my bright red hair, and goes up and talks to my mom either before the game, after the game, during the game, or whatever, and gets interviewed for the story and photographed for the story as a uh, you know soccer mom who's voting for the Democratic candidate. I forget who it was. I think it was Al Gore. And so that photograph somehow lands somewhere in like the 1996 era servers of all these uh you know news organizations that have access to whatever array of photographs that were available back then. And so that photograph of my mom being a soccer mom somehow becomes the go-to photo for a lot of news outlets that are suddenly wanting to write or having occasion to write about soccer moms. So that photo ends up in Sports Illustrated as like one of the things that make sports great. It ends up in I think Time Magazine as like what's hot and what's not about the election, or I don't know if it was that what's hot or what's not, but it was somewhere along those lines. And I forget if there was a fourth organization, but somewhere in my room is like a collage of all of the uh, instances of my and my mom in that photo being blurbed in all these different you know publications. So one innocent trip to a soccer game from my mom ended up with her and me becoming, not famous, but at least the poster boy and poster mom for what a soccer mom in America was at that time in 1996, 1998.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, moving back into, I guess, the sports writing industry, what are some of the biggest rookie mistakes you've noticed young sports writers or even experienced sports writers make in the industry or trying to tap into the industry?
I don't know. I mean, it it's tough because like so many never really get, because the industry itself is so brutal that, not a lot of those guys and girls have time to like realize their mistakes before they like realize this isn't for me. I want to work in an industry that's more stable or better paying, or doesn't throw me out to, you know like a 20,000 town in Tennessee or Arkansas or Idaho or whatever. Um, I guess the biggest mistake is just, I don't know, because it's tough to say, because like I didn't have the typical path, because like I started off doing editing and then general assignment writing and then beat writing with the Ravens. But I guess I would just say like, um,
Well,
make
I guess
sure that
turn-
you,
I guess I can turn the question to what advice
sure.
you give to those young aspiring sports writers who are looking to tap into this industry then.
Yeah, I guess just like broaden your horizons to what is possible. Very rare. I mean, I don't know how many kids nowadays are like growing up with the notion of one day writing for Sports Illustrated just because of, or doing like long form journalism, like, probably a decade ago. That was already kind of a dying notion because of just the collapse of, you know, print journalism as a whole. And I think kids hopefully nowadays are much more realistic about the idea of, becoming the next, Wright Thompson, or, you know, uh, you know, name your long form takeout journalism writer, just because there's not a whole lot of market for that. Because nowadays everything is atomized. Nowadays everything is about like what kind of value can you provide for your outlet on a day-to-day basis. So even if, the days of writing for the New York Times as a sports feature writer are gone, there is still, with that, the rise of these team specific sites. You can go and hopefully become, in the matter of a couple of years, like the authority on Tennessee athletics or Washington athletics. And granted, that might not mean that you're writing for like the Seattle Times or the Knoxville Journal Sentinel, but there's these 24/7 sites and on3.com sites where hopefully there is like this way to get your foot in the door as an entry level writer. And then as you become more and more of an authority on that subject, then your earning power can increase, and you can drive subscriptions in a way that is valuable and, like I said, value adding. Granted, writing for a college, uh, writing as a college writer, I think is much different now than it was 10 years ago, because you have to be an authority on the transfer portal, on NIL, on, every little possible move that's happening in this in this sport that's very, very hard to kind of get your arms around, because colleges, college coaches realize that they have all the power. I think that's probably the biggest imbalance that's happened over the past decade, 2 decades ago, is like, these teams and the coaches realize that uh, in a lot of towns and on a lot of beats, there's only so much accountability that journalists can kind of hold them to, you know what I mean? Because they're the ones making the, you know, not tens of millions of dollars, but pretty close to it. And journalists are obviously getting paid relatively less and less. So you have to really find a way to tell people something that they don't know. And I guess that would just be the biggest lesson, is find a way to tell people what they don't know, and hopefully tell it to them accurately, and tell it to them before anyone else. If you can do that, then obviously you're going to get an audience on Twitter or whatever outlet that you're working with, at least on the print side. So hopefully kids nowadays are being told to report, and that they know the ways to go to distinguish themselves, because it's tough out there. There's a lot of people who want to do sports reporting, or do a lot of people who want to do sports journalism, but don't really have the know-how to do so. If you don't have a mentor, that's going to make it very, very tough. Hopefully, if you are getting into this industry, you have either a professor or someone on the beat, or someone who's working over you in an advisory role, who can tell you what to do. Because if you don't, and you're just forced to learn from your mistakes, then you might be making mistakes for a very long time before you actually have an idea of what you're doing. So a lot of, I'm just kind of spinning my wheels here, but hopefully you have someone who knows what to do. Hopefully they can tell you what exactly you need to do to put yourself in a position where you're a successful journalist.
Well, Mr. Schaefer, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. And again, congratulations on the accomplishment on being the co-Maryland Sports Writer of the Year for 2024. I wish you the best of
Of
luck.
course.
I wish you the best of luck next season reporting, and thank you again.
Thank you, McKenzie. Appreciate it.